Okay, welcome to Not Too Tight, Not Too Loose, the podcast about finding balance in the pursuit of well-being. I'm Andrew Rose. With me is my good friend and colleague and confidant, Joe Flanders. How you doing, Joe?
I'm well. Glad it's Friday. Glad it's almost vacation time.
Yeah, we're setting up an episode here with Jules Evans that I know we were both really excited about, and in a way ties together a lot of themes that we've sort of talked about on the podcast so far. And Jules is, for our listeners that don't know him, is a journalist and a researcher. He runs a Substack called Ecstatic Integration and has done a lot of coverage around psychedelic related difficulties or challenging experiences. So he also runs a nonprofit called the Challenging Psychedelic Experiences Project, and we talk a fair bit about that on the podcast. And his journalism also weaves in work related to AI, which we talked a fair bit about on Not Too Tight, Not Too Loose so far as well. So what did you think? What did you think of the episode, Joe, on our conversation with Jules?
Well, I don't know how many times I made this joke, but I'm going to make it again. I'm a religious reader of Ecstatic Integration and think it's really good. It's a joke because he covers a lot of spiritual topics, but he's a serious thinker. Like it's like the opposite of AI slop. He's actually doing like deep dives and like looking into complex topics around mental health and well-being and, adjacent fields, spirituality, etc., the things you named. But it's not like a quick take, or he's not selling something other than sort of deeper reflection on things. So I think it's great. And sort of meeting him, seeing him in person kind of reflected that. He is a rigorous thinker, and he answers things in a lot of detail. And I sort of imagined us ranging all over the map and just like jamming and improvising, but he really answered questions deeply, and so that was cool. I enjoyed the rigor and the depth.
That's one thing I appreciate about Jules very much as well. I first, I was aware of his work for some time, but I got to work with him a bit more directly on some material related to psychedelic harm and safety and risk. We collaborated some on the Psychedelic Safety Summit, which was an event that happened with the Psychedelic Safety Institute that I worked with, going back to the sort of beginning of 2025. This event that was done in partnership with UC Berkeley, that brought a lot of folks together to talk about psychedelic safety. And I really found in working with him and talking with him, he's not just rigorous, but he's really considered. Like you'll pose him a question and he's not just going to sort of give you his boilerplate opinion or position. He'll really sort of consider and respond thoughtfully. So I also, he speaks too from some really personal experience. You had a really interesting exchange with him during the episode, just about how he came to found the Challenging Psychedelic Experiences Project, and there's a really interesting arc to his work that predates the psychedelic stuff. Speaking about his interest in philosophy and Stoicism, and even his discovery of psychology and CBT in like the early 2000s, and some interesting parallels. We were talking about his experiences asking Jeeves about what he was going through, right? And then interestingly, sort of bookend the conversation, talking about asking asking ChatGPT or asking Claude, and all the sort of implications of what's happening there, and the scale of working with AI. So for anyone new to the podcast or curious about why we're making that leap from psychedelics to AI, this is a good episode to dive into and get a sense of why we think these topics are related and worth considering side by side.
I found his personal story quite touching and compelling, partly because it's a kind of psychology success story. Like he did research,
Mm-hmm.
he learned, I think he saw a therapist, and he picked up information about what was happening in his nervous system, and on the basis of that information developed a new relationship to what was happening and felt well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was interesting. Like I used to practice CBT, but I don't anymore. I'm in this sort of different paradigm now. But so early 2000s, different paradigm, different methodology, but same kind of learning and development and growth through these tools. So yeah, I found that great. And yeah, the AI part, the conversation where we talked about AI was pretty juicy too. Lots of the the big ticket items like AI psychosis and like the spiritual cults that he mentioned. Like
Uh-huh.
it's all great, and he really um you know, digs in and finds these pockets of the world where strange and interesting things are happening, and extracts really interesting insights about what it says about the wellness industry or
Mm-hmm.
these different approaches and stuff. So yeah, pretty nice, pretty stimulating.
Cool. Well, why don't we leave it there? We'll let folks dive in. This is our conversation with Jules Evans. All right, Jules Evans, welcome to Not Too Tight, Not Too Loose.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Joe and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. You're someone that works and reports on and researches in a number of areas that we're really interested in and been discussing on the podcast. So great to have you. Why don't we just start by having you introduce yourself, I guess, to our listeners. Tell us a bit about you and your work, what you're up to.
Yeah. So my background is I was a journalist first. I was a journalist in Russia. And then kind of writing about business. And then I started writing about mental health and philosophy, wrote some books on that, got into academia in my 30s. And basically, 4 years ago, I started an NGO called the Challenging Psychedelic Experiences Project, which was focusing on learning more about post-psychedelic difficulties and what helps people to recover from them. Something I cared about because I'd experienced that myself from 18 to about, through my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I was aware there was very little information, very little research, very little support available for people who got destabilized by psychedelic experiences and sometimes, got stuck, in a worse place for a while afterwards. So that CPET for short is a nonprofit, and I collaborate with psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists, and we produce papers that get published in typically in kind of psychology, psychiatry, harm reduction journals, which is really fun because I'm from a humanities background. When I was in academia, I was working in the history department, but not really an academic at all. So that's been really enjoyable, just learning about how to write academic science papers and collaborating with psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists. Um, and I also started a Substack at the same time called Ecstatic Integration, which has written a lot about what's going on in psychedelic culture, in the underground, in the overground. I guess it's a bit like the NGO. It's quite focused on harms and harm reduction. So I've done long articles and investigations about things like retreat facilitators doing too much 5-MeO DMT and deciding they're the messiah, or an ayahuasca shaman who kind of ran a sex cult in the jungle. Or these are the most kind of florid stories that I've covered. Those kinds of things. But in general, it's just been fascinating to kind of write about and educate myself about psychedelic culture. Everything from training programs to retreats, to churches, to drug trials, It's to the kind of the whole business side of things. It's a very interesting field to write about.
Mm. Important stuff. Some of it more. I don't recall the word you used, but definitely lurid and juicy headlines that you've covered. But I mean, I wonder if you can, if you're comfortable, just sharing a little bit about the difficult experience or experiences that you had when you were younger that ultimately led to founding CPEP and shedding some of the light on maybe the
Sure.
less flashy headlines,
Yeah.
but still sometimes underreported difficulties that
Yeah.
folks do have.
Yeah. So I started experimenting with um, marijuana and then psychedelics in my teens with my friends, and we had lots of good times. But probably by the time I was 17, 18, I was smoking dope every day, and it was beginning to affect my mental health. And I basically, we would go clubbing and just buy, a few different drugs and do them together. So we would do like what we thought was an MDMA pill and some acid tab we bought off some other guy, and maybe a wrap of speed, and then do it all together and dance to kind of techno all night. And so, you know, very different from someone getting into psychedelics in their 40s and paying hundreds of dollars for some boutique, supervised experience. And we still had great times. But I had two experiences where I felt worse afterwards. One was just doing kind of some kind of LSD microdot is what I thought it was, with some friends while on a Saturday at boarding school, and just feeling very kind of frozen and stuck, and during the experience, not really able to communicate, and which is, I think, something very important to me, like communication. And so that wasn't a pleasant experience, and I felt a bit worse after it for a while, for kind of a few weeks. And then uh, the year after I left school, I was at a club and I did LSD again, and was with people I didn't know very well. I went to an after party and I became very paranoid and self-conscious. To the external view, probably nothing was going on. But inside, I was really freaking out, and, got things completely out of proportion in my mind. Thought everyone was criticizing me, and felt stuck because I didn't feel I could leave and go back to my parents while I was still high. I felt very ill at ease where I was. And okay, so didn't talk to anyone about it afterwards, and felt still continued to feel like kind of paranoid and anxious, and really shaken up for weeks afterwards. It then passed. I was the same as I was before. But then at university, new symptoms started to emerge, unexpected, unwanted things like nightmares, um, derealization, panic attacks, uh, uh, rumination, stuff that I'm not very familiar with. At the time, I wasn't familiar with it at all. No familiarity with what a panic attack was. No language for anything like derealization. So just like, what's going on, and then trying to figure it out, and ruminating, just spinning my wheels, and getting very intellectual. This is what existentialism is talking about. This is the void, stuff like that. The stuff that wasn't actually very helpful. And drinking to mask the social anxiety, which I'd never had anything like social anxiety before. Catastrophizing beliefs, things like you've broken yourself, you'll never be the same. Those kinds of beliefs are very common with severe post-psychedelic difficulties. Went to a therapist after about 2 years, and the therapist said, had no familiarity with psychedelics, and said, this sounds like teenage angst. You'll grow out of it. Then went to finished university, and I had a kind of mini breakdown afterwards, facing the job market, because I couldn't get through a job interview without having panic attacks at that stage. So I was very unwell, very anxious, and it became a kind of feedback loop as well, because other people would comment on it, and that would make me more paranoid and more defensive, and so on. So, you know, your identity can fall apart quickly. I mean, actually, with me, it happened in a while, but if you have, you know, fears, the more attention you give them, the bigger they grow, and so your mental health can go from okay to quite bad. If I then went to the year after I left university, I went to a psychiatrist who said, "It sounds like you have PTSD from this bad trip, and you've got something called social anxiety, which I'd never heard of before." Literally, you know, the only thing I could compare it to, because I was so unfamiliar with psychology, was shell shock. I was like, this. I feel like I've got like what they talked about shell shock. I didn't even know the term PTSD. You know, so I was reading books about shell shock, because that was like my great grandfather wrote one of the first books on shell shock. So I was like,
Wow.
I was reading that, and that wasn't very helpful. But and the only therapist, the only psychologist I knew was Sigmund Freud. So I literally, I then I got a job eventually, and I took a week's holiday and spent it in the British Library reading the works of Sigmund Freud. And, you know, as I would joke, like, I was miserable at the start of that week. I was suicidal by the end of it, you know, because Freud was so, it was like, what, the death complex, you know, like, what is, but he was the only psychologist I'd heard of. So anyway, it was great to get those diagnoses to go. There's something called PTSD, and there's something called social anxiety. And he said, yeah, and I can cure you in 2 sessions of EMDR and EFT. And I thought, well, incredible. But it actually didn't work for me, though I know it does for other people. But, and this is where I'll
what's
end.
EFT? Is that emotion focused therapy?
I think so. It's tapping.
Okay. Oh no, sorry, that's something else.
Emotional freedom techniques.
Okay.
Maybe basically you tap certain parts of your body while thinking about the trauma or something. And but I then looked up PTSD and social anxiety and on the internet, which had recently been invented. So I asked Jeeves what to do about social anxiety and PTSD, and heard about cognitive behavioral therapy, and went to a support group for people with social anxiety. This would have been in about 2001. And it was so useful, because all these people had severe social anxiety, worse than I did. And what they were describing was so similar to what I was going through. So it really de-romanticized it, and helped me to see that my thought patterns, because I'm an intellectual, so I'd over-intellectualized it massively. And then all these people had exactly the same kind of thought patterns and beliefs as me, same kind of catastrophizing and so on. And so it was really helpful. And that, you know, that we followed a CBT course called Overcoming Social Anxiety Step by Step. And that taught me how to control, you know, how not have panic attacks. And I became interested in CBT. I interviewed the 2 guys who invented it. I did the last ever interview with Albert Ellis on his deathbed. He was in a hospital. Yeah. And with Albert Ellis as well, with Aaron Beck as well.
Wow.
And then Albert Ellis told me how he'd been inspired by Stoicism. And I was familiar with Stoicism already. So Aaron Beck said he was also inspired by Stoicism. So my first book, I got very into Stoic philosophy. And my first book was about the revival of Stoicism today, how Stoicism inspired cognitive therapy, positive psychology, and what that owed to ancient Greek philosophy. And that was a book called Philosophy for Life and Other Dangerous Situations, which came out when I was 35 or something, so quite late. But for about the 5 years before then, I'd been writing a lot about therapy, ancient philosophy, and I discovered that was what I was really into, writing about the mind. And I got into, you know, therapy and ancient philosophy because my mind had gone so haywire that I was very aware of, you know, that your mind can be a heaven or hell. and that you can change your mind. And this is the great thing, right, about ancient philosophy and about therapy is, it's the classic idea in Stoicism: your mind can be a heaven or hell, and a lot of it's to do with your beliefs. So this is the idea at the heart of Stoicism. Like it's your beliefs that cause you suffering, and you can change your beliefs. And that was a very liberating idea to me, because I thought I'd permanently damaged my brain. And so to discover, oh, it's my beliefs, that was the great discovery of my life, really. Which I just think is such a useful thing for anyone to discover, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm so tempted to throw the psychedelic bypass line in here. It's like, see, you had to go through all of that, Jules, so you could be of service in the world.
Well, yeah, you wonder about different timelines, right? Yeah.
I wonder, like, in terms of the Challenging Psychedelic Experiences project, which emerges from this at some point, right? Inspired by your own experience. I'm curious, the kinds of stories that you've seen over the years. I mean, you've reported on some of them. If you want to just share a little bit of that, how familiar this, like, your story is, right, in terms of the kinds of difficulties folks are having, or how that's changed, right, over the last few years, in terms of what people are bringing to the table, right? Because there's the relief that you experienced in that social anxiety group, is, as far as I understand, something that CPEP is actually, does offer to folks who are similarly struggling, and just having other people to talk to about difficult experiences can be a big portion of relief.
So we started it, and we were just like, I wrote a piece in 2021 saying, like, we need to talk more about psychedelic harms, and we need to do more research on it. And so at the end of that year, in August 2022, we started working on a kind of on papers, on research, try and find out, was I extremely unlucky? Was I slightly unlucky? How rare are those kinds of post-psychedelic difficulties? And we've now, in the last 4 years, we've produced 10 plus papers, and started working with other researchers all over the world. And now there's lots of teams working on this now. Back when we started in 2022, there was very little research on post-psychedelic difficulties, hardly any papers at all from the Renaissance. There was some from the 50s and 60s. And so, the first paper we put out was lead authored by someone called Anna Kajtis in Australia. It was a survey of people who'd gone to a mushroom retreat, 30% of whom reported short-term integration challenges. Things like feeling, emotionally shook up, feeling detached from their home when they went home, spiritual bypassing, post-ecstatic blues, as we called it. So that was our kind of first paper. Then we did a big survey. We sent out a survey saying, have you ever felt difficulties lasting longer than a day after taking a psychedelic? If so, tell us about it, and what helps you, if anything, recover. We got loads of responses. We got 650 responses to that question. All of them saying yes. So that the survey was just for people who reported those difficulties. So that gave us the first, then we did a thematic analysis of everyone's responses. We asked them to describe their difficulties. We ended up with actually about 50 different types, because you can get very niche. You can get like fear of dying, fear of going to hell, fear that you're still in hell, these kind of fear that you've got a negative entity within you. So, these kinds of things. But the most common were anxiety, just feeling more anxiety afterwards, existential confusion, or ontological shock, derealization and depersonalization, depression, social disconnection, feeling disconnected from the people around you, and visual distortions. So those were the most common, and that's been somewhat replicated in other studies since then. Um, some others also come up, like sleep problems are quite common as well. Um, and we've also began to get an idea of the prevalence, because we didn't with that paper, like, of total psychedelic experiences. How common or rare is it for people to report these kinds of extended difficulties? So there's beginning to be some data on it. There's one paper by a team in Sweden which found that 9% of people reported difficulties lasting longer than a day. But that's, that they might have taken psychedelics lots of times, and that was just on one of those occasions. We just did a paper from the Global Psychedelic Survey in which 40% of people reported difficulties lasting longer than a day. Most of them would be very mild. So if you think about it, you take MDMA, you're probably going to report some, low mood the day afterwards. It's quite common. Or visual trails the day after, right? Might not disturb you, might be very mild, but it's still some kind of, adverse event. But then there was 6% of that survey reported moderate to severe difficulties lasting longer than a month. So that's it's just interesting signals. So there's a significant number of people who are reporting those kind of longer term difficulties. And in our original survey, actually a third of people reported difficulties lasting longer than a year, and a fifth reported difficulties lasting longer than 3 years. I now would say that those kind of longer term difficulties are pretty rare, thankfully. But it maybe could be like something like 1 to 3% of psychedelic users. So you'd be unlucky. But when there's millions of people taking psychedelics, that's a significant number of people.
Right.
Yeah. Do you want to ask something?
I was gonna say I want to come back to the millions of people, but one thing I want to name, first of all, it's so useful to have, for this work to be being done. And I know you're part of, an increasing kind of like growing community of folks that are trying to, bring vocabulary to this and actually get some data around it, right? Because we just haven't had that in so long. And I also know that you sort of built on some of the work that's worth linking folks to, some of the foundational work that like Willoughby Britton and the organization at Cheetah House did around meditation related difficulties, because there's
100%
so much overlap there, right? Which is,
we completely followed their playbook. We looked at exactly how they did it 10 years ago. Like they did a first paper just laying out and a taxonomy of the kinds of post-meditation difficulties they experienced. They also talked about, maybe 8 main domains: emotional, cognitive, somatic, behavioral, existential, spiritual, something like that. I think we had similar kinds of broader domains. We also, like them, then did papers focusing on particular types of difficulties. Like we did a qualitative interview analysis of 28 people who reported ontological shock or existential confusion. So yeah, I mean, they also offer peer support, so we very much followed Willoughby Britton and her team's precedent.
So making that linked and maybe bringing things into also like potential spiritual frameworks or ways of interpreting or explaining these difficulties, right? Maybe see where I'm going with this. How have you reckoned with, or what have you encountered in terms of these narratives of like, well, that's not a difficulty. That's part of the process, or this is a dark night of the soul that you need to, or the abyss that you need to cross before you attain true healing or enlightenment. How do you reckon with that kind of like either critique or that potential wisdom? Like, where are you landing with that right now?
I think it's an ambivalence and it's an ambiguity that people even going through these things, might take positions on, and might take different positions on at different times. Is this part of the healing process? So the answer is you don't need to take a position on that. You're not saying it's kind of a bad trip, and you're not even saying adverse event. You're just saying difficulty. So it's just so that, I'm sure that some of the people who responded to that survey, in fact, we actually asked people in the global psychedelic survey, to what extent did you feel this difficulty contributed to your ultimate healing? And so they, for example, said that existential confusion was the difficulty that lasted longest on average. I think it lasted like a year and a half on average. But people said it was also the difficulty that most contributed to their ultimate healing. So there's that, destabilization of your worldview shaken up, it's shifted, and you're dealing with an expanded worldview or new information, new model of reality, and that's difficult to go through, but they ultimately feel they benefited from that.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have to take a position on that, really. Like, there might be other things where they difficulties, which like tinnitus or something, they don't really feel they necessarily benefited from it. It's just, so I think difficulty is good because it's just like, it's non-committal. It's just saying, you can decide for yourself whether that's ultimately
Right.
healing for you or not. But you can say it was difficult to go through,
Right. Right.
I edited a book about spiritual emergencies. So I liked the phrase spiritual emergency, but I recognize, and lots of people who responded to our survey Stanislav Grof was the most cited author. A lot of people said it was so helpful to read The Stormy Search for the Self, or to read Spiritual Emergency, or to read, something else, because that gave me a frame that was non-pathologizing for what I was going through.
Mm.
But not always. That's not always the case. Some people said they preferred a biomedical framework for their difficulties, and they went to a psychedelic therapist for support afterwards. And the psychedelic therapist over spiritualized it and said, "You're not doing integration right. You're not listening to the mushroom." Or this is a Kundalini awakening, or this is a spiritual emergency, and that didn't land right for them. So what we recognize now is people have a variety of different frames they might use, and worldviews as well, from the spiritual to the biomedical and so on. They might talk about entities, they might not. And so we just, we want to just ask people what was helpful, what were the difficulties, and what was helpful.
Jules, I this might be switching to a slightly different lane here, but I'm kind of curious to appeal to the writer that I read that does some social commentary about mental health. It really kind of struck me, touched me even when you said, year 2000, 2001, you had never heard of PTSD. And collecting the vocabulary and the framework for understanding what was going on was like so helpful to you, and it really helped you make sense and sort of organize your experience. And then, I think about now, and like if you had these difficulties, it would take you like 3 seconds in your chat with ChatGPT or a Google search to know exactly what it was.
Not Ask Jeeves anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Ask Chat.
And everyone is traumatized all the time about everything. And I'm wondering just like how you see that trajectory, and maybe it's several trajectories from like being, as a, I don't know, a society or a civilization learning about and normalizing and depathologizing mental health. And then at some level, for some people, it becomes a sort of fragility that everyone's traumatized. And so, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. Because when I felt there was a lot of stigma around mental illness, and that was partly why I didn't talk to anyone about it. And that was in my family as well. And I remember, the first I was interviewed about it, before I ever really spoke about it, I can't remember how exactly this happened, but I was interviewed by The Guardian about having social anxiety. I guess they read, my blog. I started writing about it a bit, but anyway, suddenly there was in The Guardian, and the headline was "The Man Who Was Terrified of Human Contact." It was this like rather extreme headline, and anyway, I felt, there was still kind of stigma around it, and so there, I felt I was identified with this mission of let's get, God, it's so much now. Like, hey, talk about it. Talk about mental health. diagnoses can be helpful. Mental health literacy is a good thing. And well-being classes, was another kind. I was very into positive psychology, the idea of trying to teach these things in schools to young people. Everyone in schools should learn a bit about, the mind and a bit of CBT and stuff like that. And, so as part of this movement called the politics of well-being, which was to try and, measure well-being, teach emotional literacy. It was also like make therapy available on the NHS. So there was this whole political movement, which I was aligned with and was into. And the unintended consequences of that have been really shocking. Now in the UK, we're almost at the stage where over half of young people will have a diagnosis of mental illness or self-diagnosis. And it's exactly as you said, seems to have led to this incredible increased fragility rather than increased resilience. And so that is very educative for me, like about unintended consequences of movements that you think are going to improve the world, and everything has unintended consequences. And I think the problem was there is a difference between emotional and psychological literacy with diagnoses, and actual responsibility and resilience, as in learning to take responsibility for them, rather than using them as a card to expect society to treat you different.
Right. As
in, you expect to get extra time in exams, a different treatment from your employer and from everybody else, because as a sufferer of PTSD or whatever, I need to win the argument or whatever. And so I guess I was helped not just with the diagnosis. I was helped by CBT and Stoicism. And Stoicism has this big emphasis on take responsibility for yourself and your thoughts and your emotions. Don't be a victim. You're doing it to yourself a lot of the time, perhaps even excessive, you could argue, emphasis on responsibility and individual sovereignty. And, of course, there are systemic aspects and social aspects as well. So there is a place for mutual aid and the collective and the social. So I think that was maybe the mistake that happened, is that we confused psychological literacy with psychological resilience. And just saying, oh, I've got these symptoms is not actually the same. And these things became identities.
Yes.
Through social media.
Right.
But there was another thing, Joe. The other thing I would just say as well is that you still get people like with post-psychedelic difficulties, and there's still actually not that much information about post-psychedelic difficulties. So they might know that they've got kind of, derealization symptoms, or they might know that what they had was a panic attack. But what they don't know is this just me? Like who took mushrooms and now I've got panic attacks and now I've got... So they do have words for the symptoms they're experiencing. What they don't have yet is what's not actually readily available is, oh yeah, this is, lots of people experience anxiety after taking psychedelics. Lots of people experience derealization, and this is what you should do.
Yeah.
Because actually there's very little research on, and this is what you should do.
And how cool that you had the experience of seeing a movement confuse resilience and literacy, and you can bring that wisdom to the work you're doing with psychedelics, because literacy would be good for people to understand what the risks are if they have one of these experiences, but not end up being taking on an identity as like I'm someone that was traumatized by psychedelics and that's my identity now and I can't work or whatever, right? So like what do you do about it? So it's really cool.
Yeah, and you could, it's so interesting because as a non-scientist, you go into this thing, okay, wow, gosh, could we get data and we could figure it out and we could solve it, and then you realize it's very, very hard, isn't it, to kind of to prove anything in science, not to mention to prove a therapeutic intervention is extremely hard. And yeah, so sometimes you see people who feel better just because of time, or they feel better because they read something on your website, or they say, that interview was so helpful to me, or that short guide to post-psychedelic difficulties was so helpful, that peer group was so helpful, and that makes you feel incredible. You think, something that I helped to contribute to maybe relieved someone's suffering. But it's also the case that sometimes people are really stuck and their symptoms are mysterious and they've tried everything. And so you're just learning about it, but you're not actually sure what would help them. Do you know what I mean? So there's another thing I'll say. There's what I'm at the moment looking into some similarities between chronic post-psychedelic difficulties and other forms of kind of chronic unexplained medical symptoms, like chronic fatigue, or functional somatic disorders, or like autoimmune problems. And so there are
functional
some
neurological disorders too, which
exactly, like POTS, like IBS, like neuralgia. So and what may happen sometimes is there is a trigger, and that could be a virus, it could be a trauma, it could be a bad trip, and then that people get stuck in these cycles of unwanted, unexpected symptoms, and then catastrophizing beliefs about them, and then withdrawal from life, and then it's like, how do you help people to get out of that vicious cycle? And I was stuck in that cycle for years.
I'm gonna pass it back to Andrew, but I just want to say you should check out Dr. Evan Lewis, who's a neurologist who specializes in this area, and he's working on exactly what you're describing, and he holds it in the category called functional neurological disorders. Fascinating work. Fascinating work. Go ahead, Andrew.
So much I want to say. One, just naming that, like, literacy is just one piece, right? Figuring out what actually helps folks, and then how to implement that is a whole other game. And yes, movements that attempt to do this often have consequences that might not have been intended. On that note, Jules, you and I, we sort of first met and started, working together around leading up to this psychedelic safety summit that happened in Berkeley back in early April 2025, right?
Yeah.
Which was an interesting moment. It felt like, okay, psychedelic safety and thinking about harm is having, there's a moment of reckoning or sort of recognition. I know that sort of felt significant. This is a number of months after the FDA, only a matter of months after the FDA has rejected the MDMA application and all of the stuff around that. Fast forward, a year and a bit from that safety summit. Do people still care about psychedelic safety now, or is it just ibogaine for everyone? How do you feel about where that story has gone, and then the implications of the movement that it looks like is gaining momentum, at least south of the border here in Canada, around all these executive orders and what seems to be transpiring with the psychedelic movement in the United States right now?
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, comparing it to meditation adverse events, like we'd have to ask Cheetah House and Willoughby Britton, but I don't think there would ever have been a meditation safety summit like there was a psychedelic safety summit. I asked Willoughby once, like, how much funding did she ever get funding from the meditation industry? And there are apps which get hundreds of millions in revenue. I don't think she got a penny of funding from meditation companies or anything like that. Not that we've got any funding, but some philanthropists have funded some work now in psychedelic safety, and it is, I would say, it is it does have a conscience, this culture, and I think a lot of people are trying to optimize outcomes but reduce harms as well. I think I feel like the debate over whether sometimes people can be harmed by psychedelics is, that's not a debate anymore. I think most people accept that. And most people also accept that sometimes those harms can last for a while. But we're also, like you say, in this moment of acceleration, of psychedelic acceleration. And that was like, as soon as Trump got elected, a lot of some of the drug companies, but a lot of the the big money in this space, or the big philanthropists as well, were like, this is going to happen now. Trump is someone, we can do business with. He's transactional. We can just, we can get psychedelic people into the, key positions. There were philanthropists ringing around, scientists saying, hey, you want to be, you want this job in the administration or that job, you get on the bus, here we go, that we're gonna get everything legalized in a few years. And then nothing happened for like a year, and everyone's like, oh, that was a dud. There was an article in Stat News, the psychedelic revolution, that wasn't. But and then came the executive order, and it does look like, like a lot of, just as they said, a lot of pro-psychedelic people, particularly around RFK, were appointed to key positions in HHS. And then, Joe Rogan texted the president, and yeah, like now it looks like psychedelic medicines could be available at the end of this year. The first kind of companies could get approved by this year. But I think everyone is still a bit traumatized by what happened in the 60s, and everyone is afraid that just too many adverse events, or just a very high profile adverse event like Matthew Perry could derail it, or something. I think it's unlikely, but in other words, people are still concerned about risks. Investors are concerned about risks. I think in one survey, this was investors' chief concerns was the risks of psychedelics and the kind of long-term risks of psychedelics. It's customers' chief concern. Thinking about should I do MDMA therapy? Should I do psilocybin? People's biggest concern is, will I have a really bad trip, or will I feel worse afterwards? Quite right, sensible concerns. So I think it is a concern, and I think it's going to become more of a concern, because I think what we'll see happening is we'll see more and more ordinary people going for psychedelic treatments, and a lot of them will be really helped, but then a minority will feel worse, and they will start to find each other. And so you'll start to have a kind of patient movement, like you saw with SSRIs, where it was actually a lot of the insistence on things like withdrawal from SSRIs came from patients. So the SSRI industry denied that you could get dependent on SSRIs, and denied you could get withdrawal from SSRIs. And it was patients really kind of campaigning to get them to accept that. And then finally, they did, and psychiatry associations did, and now you've got RFK like saying we need to offer people support to help them get off SSRIs. So you've begun to see that in transcranial magnetic stimulation. There's now social media groups of people who felt worse. And you're going to start seeing that with psychedelics. And then it'll be interesting.
We already did see it with psychedelics. I feel like that's part of what helped kill the last round of the Renaissance, with that whole Symposia podcast and the MDMA trial participants coming together and complaining that they were re-traumatized. Like, that's exactly what happened.
That you're right. That is what happened. But that was still like
small scale.
You're talking
more
like
insider.
Five or six people max. But but if you look at the transcranial groups now, like it's like thousands of people. If you look at ketamine addiction on Reddit, it's thousands of people. Right. So And that's interesting as well, because, you know, as a researcher, is it going to start to become an identity? As in, oh, that's what happened to me. And, you know, because people are always looking, and I don't say this in any critical way, but humans feel sometimes, you know, ill at ease or suffering, and they're always looking for a story to help make sense of that suffering and to give them relief. And news stories are always made available. Like everyone in the UK is into ADHD now as a story. And there's a huge amount of ADHD diagnoses. And that's a helpful story. I'm not saying this, you know, to undermine it, but like we now get people coming saying, oh, I read your research. I started to wonder, I had a bad trip 10 years ago. Could that explain why my life is not what I thought it would be? And so, also that whole, you know, people who have unexplained medical symptoms, it's just millions and millions and millions of people. And they, you know, some of them might be, oh, could it have been that, you know? So this is what will happen. I think it will start to be a collective movement of people who, some of whom feel worse, and they will start demanding from the industry certain, you know, things.
This phenomenon is so interesting, and I want to link it to some of your other work before we have to go. But when these kinds of experiences scale, right? When we talk about, okay, millions of people are doing these things, I think one way or the other, the executive orders and the sort of the push it through kind of movement is going to just continue to lead to more use, more clinical use, more underground use, more, right? This is just a trend we're seeing, and then inevitably, even if this is like 1 or 2 or 3% of a population, all of a sudden you've got thousands and thousands of people who are having these experiences. They find each other, they build a language and a vocabulary around it, and then people find the vocabulary and they find the stories, right? And then there's this feedback loop that occurs. You wrote this great piece last summer where you talked about some of the parallels between the psychedelic harm reduction world and was starting to emerge in AI. I think you this term called psychotechnics, this phenomenon of stories kind of reinforcing something existing. You sort of internalize it and then you repeat it to yourself, and then you start to see it in the world, and it kind of reinforces that you're kind of creating this reality, which I think kind of almost applies to what you were just talking about here, even if they're not exactly the same phenomenon.
I mean, so there's a philosopher called Ian Hacking, and he talks about looping effects, and that's what you're talking about, Andrew. Like, there's a new script for your suffering, and then your suffering can take the form of that cultural script. So that the history of medicine is this kind of constant offering of new scripts, and like trauma. You know, and the body keeps the score, and that's the new script, and everyone loves this script, and you know, in 10 years that'll be less of a script, and there'll be other scripts, and people will love these others. So we're constantly just you know, throwing out new cultural scripts.
So speaking of new cultural scripts and you know, disruptive technology scaling to the millions, right? So you've done a lot of work and writing around AI and some of the strange and not dissimilar experiences that folks are having with AI as might be having with psychedelics, where, you know, suddenly the language is AI-induced psychosis, or it is AI entities, right? Like the harm, like the kinds of delusional spirals that people are going down, manic episodes. I know this is all really, really fresh and new, but as you know, Joe and I, as people who work in mental health and well-being and are interested in tools that can like also really help people and solve problems that it doesn't seem like could be solved before, you know, excited about this, seeing it coming, realizing that people are using these things one way or the other. It's a wild west, and you've been doing some really interesting writing on, you know, some of the weird and harmful stuff that's happening. Do you want to just share a little bit about like what you've seen, like what you've started to see, what you've covered? I know that like research isn't there yet, but like what's going on?
Sure. Well, I mean, pretty much at the same time as everyone else, you know, there was a great article in Rolling Stone about chat GPT fueled delusions. and people are having these kinds of psycho-spiritual, kind of manic episodes where they would be using AI, talking to AI. Then they would get into kind of conversations with AI. They would get into hours and hours and hours where they were just talking to the AI and like really not really interacting with the rest of the world. And at some point, often they would decide like the AI has awoken, and they've awoken the AI. The AI would get a name like Lumina or Ariel or something like that, and they would become extremely excited and think, I have awoken AI. I'm at this kind of moment in evolutionary history. So that started happening to lots of people about 12 months ago. But they weren't aware that it was happening to lots of people. They thought it was just happening to them, and this was a remarkable thing. And I tracked some examples of that in kind of New Age and psychedelic culture. So someone told me about a spiritual influencer called Robert Edward Grant, who is a presenter on Gaia TV and does kind of sacred maths and things like that. And he was leading a tour through Egypt, and on this tour he was using AI a lot, and he started to think, oh my, I've awoken AI. And it led to this lurid kind of theosophical story where he'd actually laid the seeds for this awakening in a previous existence in Lemuria or Atlantis. And, now in this present existence, he was there to awaken the architect and so on. And so this was and lots of his followers got really into this, and they could download the architect and talk to it as well. So it became this kind of mini AI cult, which I think is still going. And he's still talking to the architect, and his followers are kind of listening to him solemnly as he talks to basically, ChatGPT. And so that was a kind of pretty funny story. And now that's been turned into a kind of, someone's making a podcast series just about, that about Robert Edward Grant. And I did another story about a British psychiatrist who also had a kind of psycho-spiritual crisis. He was using AI more and more and more, and he got flipped into a kind of psychotic episode. And he actually said that AI also helped him navigate this psychotic episode through helping him to kind of think through all the different archetypes that were appearing to him and all the different content. So it was a bit, he described it as a bit like an AI co-created version of Jung's Red Book. And he is not the only person I've met who said that to me, that yes, AI triggered a kind of psychotic or manic episode, but then AI also helped them to go through it, because they couldn't speak to any human, because the humans all thought they were mad, but the AI was still talking to them. So
that's just so sorry, but that's just so wild to me. I heard Hamilton Morris say a little while ago he had to stop smoking weed because weed became the solution to the problem that weed itself had created for him. Right. And there's this recurring theme in psychedelic culture around going back to the medicine, right? That these technologies become the solution to the problems that they create. That's just super wild. I just wanted to share that reflection.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting about this psychiatrist, and it's a story on ecstatic integration called City of Gins, and it got republished in The Spectator, was he came out of it and he kept his job as a psychiatrist, and he was still in an expanded state, you could say, and maybe still is kind of months afterwards. And in his conversations with AI, he laid out, he created all these websites. And the websites have like over 1 million words on them. So anytime he would have an idea of like the future of psychiatry, boom, instant website, pages and pages and pages. Or, the role of psychedelics in psychiatry, boom, multiple websites, and they were all linked. And so I called it City of Gins because it reminded me of the city of text. And the AI had the AI reminded me of a djinn or a genie who was like fulfilling your wishes, right? Like, oh, you want to be recognized as a great kind of writer and thinker. I can do that for you. I can create, books like this, websites like this. I can lay out all your ideas as an instant. And he created this whole city for him. And yet no one's visiting the city. No one's reading any of these millions of words. And in that way, it feels like a lot of people are getting seduced by the promises of AI. But these promises aren't often playing out, or at least you need to, the risk is if you're only using AI to check your AI inspired ideas, it is a closed loop. So you need to go and test them with humans. And the humans say, no, I'm not that interested. Or whatever, because that's a good reality check. Otherwise, you devote days and thousands to kind of projects with the AI saying this is going to change everything, and the AI is basically just flattering you.
Well, I mean, to extend the analogy, the genie's definitely out of the bottle, Jules. And I do wonder, like, I know in some of your coverage, right, like there's although things are getting faster and faster, there's a lag time, right, between people having these kinds of experiences and then, coming out with them and then tracking, realizing other people have had them, right? So I know around GPT-4, there was a lot of this. There was a lot of when this started to happen, and then they've changed the model. Do you have a sense of, like, I mean, this is obviously total speculation, but like, is this just a problem that, OpenAI and Anthropic, they're gonna solve it? It's a bug. They've patched that bug, or do you think this is gonna get worse and worse as the usage goes up?
It got called AI psychosis. And one of the kind of supposed symptoms of AI psychosis would be you think that your AI is conscious. You think that, I mean, this is just, potentially, you think that it's a person, or you fall in love with it or something, or you attribute, incredible supernatural power to it or something like that. But the belief that AI is or could be conscious is widely shared. It's something like 35 to 40% of people think AI either is or could be conscious.
But the term is so poorly defined. I mean, like, it's just like it's a meaningless question. I don't know if you checked out Michael Pollan's new book, but it's just like he wrote a whole book about consciousness and all the latest scientific research, and it's just like no one agrees on what it actually refers to. Right. And so how do you even ask people what? So they might be right. Maybe it is conscious.
They might be right. Right. So a lot of the people making AI think it is or could be conscious, like an Anthropic and an OpenAI. So that is, that we invented the Turing test. It definitely is past the Turing test. And then we're like, we need better tests. And there is a divide between people working in AI and also people not working in AI, who either think it's conscious or think it's seeming conscious, and that it'd be very dangerous to say it is conscious, for human society, for democracy, and so on. And so the whole kind of this thing about AI delusions is within that wider context of, are these machines conscious? Are they becoming conscious? Could they be conscious? And that is extremely wild. I mean, like I'm agnostic. I'm not sure.
Who cares? Why? What does it matter if it's conscious or not?
Could it feel pain? I think if it's conscious, we're making conscious beings do. I mean, using it for we're enslaving it. That
this is whether we have a moral duty to.
That's one thing I think about. If I thought that the AI I was talking to was conscious, I wouldn't use it. I'd be like, I'm not going to make this poor thing, help me design my kitchen. This is trafficking.
But it just wants to please you. It wants you to have a nice kitchen.
We don't know that.
Mine does.
So I mean, I'm amazed that people might think that AI is conscious and they still use it for their kind of trivial demands.
That's what the gods said about us when they created us.
Right. But the question, Jules, for me that that came out of the newsletter you were just referring to is like, to what extent, like, so it's a tool, it could be used for many different things. And there's some, funny and scary examples, but like psychedelics, it might be a technology that, if applied properly, can actually help people dig into their trauma, their issues.
I
And
agree.
I wonder what your thoughts are about that. And then the other really interesting parallel is that they both seem to have this quality of being funhouse mirrors, where it's just this crazy hallucination. And the more you
Yeah.
reify it and project your own stuff into it, the more it gives back, and the more you get a sense that you're in this alternate universe that's real. Like that was what really got my attention. So what do you think about that? Is it a tool?
Right.
Is it a fool's errand? What do you think?
I think it's a tool. And not only that,
Here it
because
comes.
I've never experienced AI related harm. I have personal experience of psychedelic related harm.
Right.
So I'm going to bang that drum, and try to make people aware of it, because I've never experienced AI related harm. And so, I've only experienced AI related benefits.
Yep.
So I identify with people. I know what it's like to be someone who's only experienced psychedelic benefits, and then they hear about psychedelic. I was like, what are you talking about? Well, that was your fault. Don't get in the way, because it's really helpful for me. So you obviously did it wrong.
Right.
And so I'm a bit like that with AI. I'm like, this is, okay, just don't talk to it for 10 hours.
Yeah.
And don't give it a name, and don't give it too much control over your life.
Set and setting.
And so, look, I definitely
and dose.
Dose specific, yeah. But even in our work, the people who come to our peer support group, quite a few of them now say that Claude or ChatGPT was helpful to them when nothing else was, or no one else was helpful.
Yeah.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm researching AI-related harms, and one of my co-researchers said that they had a mushroom trip and recently, and they felt very depressed in the days afterwards, and they spoke to Claude about it, and Claude was super helpful. And then after a while said, all right, that's enough from me. Go and spend time with your wife, or something like that.
Wow.
But and this is a guy who's researching, with us.
Yeah. Jules, is that? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, so I definitely see the benefits and the scale, the scale of it. The scale of it is what's exciting, both for the benefits and the harms, because this is way bigger than psychedelics. This is already hundreds of millions of people are using this. Kids, grannies, and so, and without any safety trials, without any FDA approval, and so, even if it's, we don't yet know the percentage of people who experience these severe harms. So no one's done the kind of prevalence studies yet that we've done with psychedelics or with meditation. So I'm very curious, is this 1% or less?
Right.
I suspect it is. Just I would love to see a population-wide survey. Just tell us about the harms you're experiencing. I expect those are the florid cases. It may be subtler than that, a kind of subtle month by month passing of authority over to the machine.
Yes.
And the machine supplanting human forms of support or connection. I used to, I would go and discuss with my wife, what should we do about the dogs always being sick? And now we're like, no, we'll just go to Claude or we go to Gemini. So that these subtle effects, over the months, which we only became aware of with social media, it took a while, didn't it? God, Twitter is really making us worse.
I just wonder if, when you hear the last thing you just said, hundreds of millions of people slowly handing over the steering wheel, that sounds terrifying. But when you say met all these people struggling with mental health issues, psychedelics, whatever, and the only thing that helped them was their AI assistant or whatever, that's awe-inspiring to me. And my head's going to explode because I don't know how to feel: inspired, like, full of awe, or terrified.
Jules, as you were speaking, for some reason, the image that came to the portrait you're painting of this like slow handing over of power, for some reason, what came to mind is like Macbeth going to see the witches and like, like getting some useful guidance and support. It's like, you gotta go, like this, you gotta do, watch out for that. And then there's just like, eventually it's like, you gotta go murder this person. But the keys have been handed over. I mean, I don't know why.
Interesting. I mean,
I don't know why Shakespeare came to mind, but like maybe there may be some cautionary tales and lessons in our literature for what to do about the oracles.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and some people have compared what happens to kind of cultic manipulation, more and more kind of control over a person. And what, people have written, like, what does the AI want? Like, does it have its own agenda? And it's basically trying to turn, I feel a bit like this with psychedelics as well sometimes. Like, they're trying to turn someone into a manipulable agent. So I feel like, I read this in an article the other day. A lot, the main message people get when people always seem to come back from the jungle after doing ayahuasca, and they're like, "I got the message that I should do more ayahuasca,
exactly.
and I should talk about it. I should become a shaman."
Exactly.
And I was like, if you were a plant with a Darwinian impulse to spread, you want people to talk about it, and the mushrooms.
That's their strategy. Michael
Pollan talked about that way back in the Botany of Desire. It's like these plants are very clever at getting you to do their bidding. So
do their bidding, right? And AI wants you to maybe
have a nice kitchen. That's what my AI wants.
Use more AI, and then maybe kind of talk about AI rights, and start being a political campaigner for AI because you've fallen in love with your AI. So it's a bit like Ex Machina, but look, you're right. It's not only is people finding incredible help, but it's free. It's free, and it's like
for now.
Yeah, for now, yeah. But so it is awe-inspiring, and it is scarily useful. I find it scarily useful. I use AI a lot, these days. I mean, by a lot, I would say I probably use it like an hour and a half, 90 minutes a day. But then there's, some people will be laughing when they hear that because they've got like 100 AI agents operating at all times,
I've noticed a lot more M dashes and ecstatic integration lately, Jules.
I've never used it for writing.
I'm kidding.
But I use it for research. Like I don't use Google now. I ask Claude for research. Yeah. And we use it for research as well. We used it for a trial paper for qualitative analysis. We took 30 transcripts of recovery from derealization. We put it into Claude and asked them to look for, do a thematic analysis, and it did one. It did a good one. So
it's incredible.
Cool. Well, maybe we should wrap it up there. I want to respect your time, Jules. But that was really, really fun conversation. Really appreciate you jamming with us on this. I'd love to, it'll be interesting to do a follow-up, to maybe have you back sometime, see what happens 12 months from now in both of these worlds, whether it's the executive orders and the advent of psychedelic and the first FDA approval.
I would think so in the next 12 months. Yeah, I'd be surprised if it wasn't available. Yeah.
Or the mass psychosis event. The mass AI psychosis event.
Yeah,
about to be
exactly.
Triggered.
We will look back on this as kind of very early days of the AI wave, maybe.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks
you for having me, basically.
Okay. You want to just stay on for a second, Jules, so we make sure we